Hi, folks. It's time for part 2 of our conversation with the Cult Sisters, Sharon and Tracey, answering the question, was Last Days Ministries a cult? Be sure to listen to part 1 if you haven't already. Now, let's pick up where we left off and hear how Last Days Ministries students and staff were broken down spiritually and mentally, what happened with the tragic plane crash in 1982, and much more.
Definitely. And it was hard. It was hard for us when we left. Sharon left a couple months before my husband and I. My marriage wasn't necessarily arranged, but you have this entire group of young people that have very strict rules on how you can relate. And you really don't have any ability to date and get to know someone. You have to be able to hear from God. So you imagine, 100 young people together, and before you can even spend time together, you have to hear from God that this is your potential life partner. So there were many relationships that were formed in that kind of setting, and we haven't done the statistics on it, but a large portion of those couples are divorced today. It's
Well,
it's an
yeah,
extraordinarily unhealthy environment. You are in that process of death to self, so you don't even know who you are.
Mhm.
They don't know who they are. So then you bring, these relationships together. And then, I ended up becoming co-director of our ICT training school. And I would say that is some of the most damaging training weeks that we did with young people that were coming from all over the country. I'm not a counselor, never took a psychology class, did not
right.
go to college. And now I am counseling. We would have, 50 students that would come through every 10 weeks and break them down. It was our goal to break them down. That was part of what we believed
Oh,
was,
really?
how you
What do
Oh,
you
would
mean?
yeah.
What do
help
you mean break them down?
so they are to be emptied out of, death to self, anything that they're holding on to. There's
Hmm.
actually, this is one of the most insidious things, and I know why WAM does it. And because I was at the seat of being one of the leaders, is when you're assigning jobs, you actually are assessing these students in their first few days that they've come in. And we're literally and cavalierly saying, oh yeah, she seems to have arrogance in here. Let's put her in the bathroom so that she can clean toilets and, kind of have a
Oh,
taste of
we're going
that
to humble
humility.
her by
Oh,
doing
this
this.
person comes with all of, these skills. We're going to
Okay.
put them, out in the fields where they're digging
Oh, right.
ditches,
If you have
right?
skills, you're not going to
Yes.
work in that because
No.
that'll make you prideful. Okay.
And we'll see how they last. So the
Right.
whole program is designed to teach you that
Oh,
humility and to
I
break
see.
you down and to basically strip
And
you.
But
and
what's
then,
even
oh,
worse,
sorry, just to
I
interject one thing.
yeah,
And then if you conform after all that, then you might be okay. Is that what you're saying?
right,
Right.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
you have to be not able
But if
to
you
be.
go, hey, this is not right for
Yes.
me. I didn't come here. I didn't sign up for this.
Then we
You're
will.
rebellious,
You are
right?
Then you're gonna
rebellious.
listen to then we're gonna give you the teaching against grumbling and complaining.
All
Yep.
right.
All right?
And then
You're
it all culminates, I would say the worst thing that Youth with a Mission still
oh,
does today, and we did that, is this
yeah.
openness and brokenness
Yes.
session
Oh,
that
really?
we bring in. We there's different teachers of YWAM that do it. The most notable one is Dr. Bruce Thompson, who leads the counseling school at
Who is
the.
not a fucking
Who's
doctor at
not.
all
Really?
I think he's a medical
of
doctor. He's
psychology.
not a
That's right.
psychology
Oh, he's not
doctor.
a
And
psychologist.
he
Yeah,
teaches
right.
the plumb line, and it's like anywhere in your life where your life doesn't line up with God's word is sin, and you have to allow God to shine the light on it and confess it. And the most insidious part of this is everything that you've been through in your life comes down to two sins, your own sin. It's either pride or unbelief. So if you have been a
Rebellion. Yeah.
victim of some horrible, if you've been a victim of sexual abuse, the reason you're not healed is because your own heart
Oh
has
my
held on to
God.
unbelief. And
Mhm.
so this session
Oh,
then
that's
is everybody now has to come and share which sin is theirs that has kept them from the healing power of Jesus. And
oh my
it goes
God.
on for hours. It often can go
Through the
8 hours,
night.
10 hours, 12 hours.
That's
Um,
one of the things in the training?
Yep,
Yes, and
absolutely.
it still happens in Youth with a Mission, and what that does, I mean,
Oh my
it's
gosh.
such a trauma bonding that's happening. It's breaking you down. It's putting you in your most vulnerable circumstances with people who are absolutely not trained. It's not a safe space, and it happened every 10-week session that we had, and it's really damaging. I mean, some people that we're hearing from now as we were doing this podcast have had to unwind some of that for years. It's taken years for people to get
Decades.
free
Decades.
of that.
No, that's very dangerous. I'm in the middle of a certification program, a non-religious spiritual director, and we're studying religious trauma. And this is
Mhm.
part of the trauma that people
Yes.
have to go through coming
Mhm.
out. I mean, that brokenness thing. Now that reminds me of a church that the church cult that I went to. That's what they did. They had a
Mm.
pastor's training school, and I didn't go through it, but that's what people told me. Say, oh yeah, they'd break you down,
They break you
right?
down.
Mhm.
And so that's a big characteristic of a cult.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
and
Breaking
young
you down.
people, very
Right,
vulnerable, very
right.
vulnerable.
Yeah, especially yeah. And then, oh my gosh, and then you can't and then when you're feeling guilty because you're not healed from your, I don't know, childhood trauma from, sexual abuse or something, and that's your fault?
It's
Of
your
course
fault.
it's your
It's
fault.
your
Uh,
fault. I mean, that to me is the most insidious thing.
yeah.
And there are, I mean, we're hearing stories. There are other people, who'd lived some life and they're confessing some, pretty awful things that probably should be reported, right? So
Yeah,
that's the
like they
danger.
did, like they
Yeah,
were
that
a
they did.
pedophile or they were a
Right,
And so
rapist.
you have this whole
right,
mixture of
right,
of stuff being said in this
right.
group
And
setting by
yeah,
people who ought never to have been
and then
overseeing that.
right, and then this is happening in an environment that's very suspicious, if not totally, opposed to psychological counseling, therapy.
Right.
It's
Oh,
gotta be a Christian therapist, or it's gotta be a pastor,
Bible-based. Bible-based.
Bible-based, and anything outside of that.
yeah.
I'll tell you a quick story. One of the reasons why I deconstruct it was I was clinically depressed after coming back
Mm,
from the mission field, and the first couple counselors I go to were like, "Oh yeah, this is there's something going on here. You gotta figure out what biblically you've done wrong, what
Or a
your
demon.
sin was." I actually went to some minister who was doing exorcisms, and
Mm.
they prayed for me, and they said, "Oh, I think you have a small demon, and I think we can get that out." And so, and then after doing that, my depression got worse, and
of
so
course.
so long story short, I I I ended up getting some decent counselors and picked up a book on cognitive behavioral therapy, totally
Mhm.
Mm.
secular, and that's what
Mhm.
saved me.
Oh,
That's
I am
Yes.
so glad, and the Youth with a Mission is very big on this as well. The casting out demons in this environment
yeah.
is a big portion of it, and
Oh,
I mean, and that's
yes.
part of why we're doing our podcast. I am so deeply sorry that I was ever a part of any of that. I mean, to take somebody in their most vulnerable emotional time and then start praying like you were talking about and driving a demon out of them that came in at some point is evil and insidious, and we can't say enough bad things about Youth with a Mission today because those practices are still at play.
So did you guys do that at Last Days Ministry too?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
To our horror and shame.
So,
Yes,
I mean,
we
I didn't
did.
hear that right. I didn't hear that very much talked about in the writing and everything, but I remember the
Well,
revivalist,
remember,
the
you've got to
brokenness, and the sin management. I remember all that.
you've got a
But
sanitized hagiography in the book. Oh, good, Tracy, where are
oh,
the
there
devil
we
horns?
go. You still got
Um,
your horns.
yeah.
Okay.
Still have my
And
horns.
and Keith would pray against demons,
Yeah.
and we would as well. Um, and often when we'd have clearly, I look back now and I see folks that showed up that had true mental health issues,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
we
Right.
assumed and presumed it was demons, and we
Right.
would
Right.
pray, and Keith would pray.
Yeah.
And what happened is, did these people get better, quote unquote? No, they didn't. So what did we do? We sent them somewhere else. We shipped them off. We didn't want them around because they
Yeah,
had problems.
made us look bad. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, I bet you didn't ship them to a cognitive behavioral
Oh,
therapist either.
No.
no.
Right, right,
No.
No, some very
um,
harmful. I mean,
right.
that's the other thing, even, the sin of homosexuality. We
Oh, yeah.
had printed
Mhm.
a whole newsletter and tracts and pamphlets, and we sent people to Exodus International, which, if your
Yes.
listeners know
Yep.
how that came crashing
Oh
down.
my
But
God.
the abuse, I mean, that's the other thing, as far as I can't get on and say, enough to just apologize for that whole segment, because we would send people
Mhm.
um, off to places like Exodus and in another place that would do more deliverance
Yeah.
ministry than we necessarily were prepared for.
Right.
So, and I would say Keith, and Sharon would know this more. So Keith was not quite as a demon chaser as
Right, that's true.
later on YWAM, when YWAM would
Oh,
really become
okay.
involved with us. I mean, they really talked about cities having principalities and
Oh,
the
I
whole
remember that
spiritual
teaching.
warfare,
We got
and
that,
Melody ate that up. So
that was
when
John
Keith,
Dawson, wasn't it?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
John
and the
Dawson,
whole
Landa
host of
Cope,
them, right? The
I
whole
mean,
Right,
host
all
of the
lots
youth
of
of the
them.
mission. And
right.
so one of the one of the catalysts for me leaving, Sharon had just been kicked out, and all of a sudden Melody's got this revelation. So we had a tornado. It's a long story
I
to that,
remember
but
that,
this
yeah.
tornado hits the ministry. They, through the help of YWAM, say that it's the spirit of abortion that has turned on Last Days Ministries. And so, because we're
What?
so involved in
They
abortion
blamed it
rights,
on
a
an evil
spirit,
spirit.
a demon spirit of abortion is also trying to destroy us, like we are speaking out against
We
abortion.
must be
So,
doing something right because they sent a
correct.
tornado, that kind of a
So,
thing? Okay.
to be able to combat that, we're going to do a prayer march around the ministry. We're going to bring out the
Oh,
drums and the instruments, and we're going to bind up the demons. We're
I see.
walking around
Okay.
the ministry,
So
and there's a
fucking
picture of me.
crazy.
I'm on that walk. It's photographic evidence, and I am mortified to this
No,
day
no.
because
That
that
sounds familiar. I was in a church kinda like that, that just took demons seriously and did stuff like that, and that whole thing about, I don't know, principalities and powers, over
Mhm.
cities, and, before you plant a church, you gotta, exorcise the demons out of the city that you're in or
yes,
whatever.
It's
yes.
laughable now, isn't
When you
it?
look back,
It's
right, right.
laughable. That's why I have these, because we're like, we're accused also of having demons to this day because we're doing this
Yes, we are.
podcast.
Right,
So
right. Yeah.
this is our part of
Well, and
okay.
and and so my next question is like, see, this is a way for people to make sense of the world, and
Mhm.
but stay within their narrow way of looking at the Bible and God, etc. So to them, it kind of makes sense. Well,
Mhm.
if that didn't work, it must be the devil. It must be this. It must be. And so they continue on doing something that now we look back and go, man, that is batshit crazy. And but it kind of makes sense in their world,
If you
Yes.
accept the
right?
premise, it makes
If
sense.
you
Yes.
accept the premises, right?
We believed it. We believed it and lived it.
Exactly. And I did the same thing in many ways. But when I look back at Keith and Melody, my question is, and you mentioned some of this, what did you like about Keith and Melody? Because
Mm.
there's a relationship. There's humans. I mean, human
Yeah.
beings having relationships, and you liked each other
Yeah.
apparently. And you saw Keith have a good heart for the oppressed or the poor or the homeless
Mhm.
or whatever. So the follow-up question is, were they merely victims of some terrible evangelical warped theology? And that can come from all the stuff that's going on in the 60s, 70s, 80s evangelical movement.
Mhm.
And people like Leonard Ravenhill, Winky Pratney, David Wilkerson, YWAM, Lauren Cunningham, John Dawson, and these people from the past, these ghosts
Finney.
of the past, like William Booth and Charles
William
Finney.
Booth.
Yep. Yep.
Well, all that stuff, right, influenced Keith and Melody
Yeah.
and the
So
ministry. So
mhm.
were they in part victims of that, or can they be blamed for coming up with this shit?
So let me take it step by step. So with Keith, things that I liked, things that I loved about Keith. He was all in, you know, he was just all in. Whatever he was doing, he was all in. And I do believe that he genuinely loved and cared about people, certain people.
Mhm.
He was generous, he was funny, he was smart, and those are the things I liked about Keith. And there were also a lot of problems with Keith too, but those are the things I liked and
Yeah.
loved and
Right. Right.
appreciated.
Right.
I do not see him as a victim of theology. I see him as creating his own little kingdom.
Okay.
And absolutely, he drew from the influences from different ones, but he's the one who said, okay, Charles Finney breaking up the fallow ground. This is what we're doing, folks. You know, this is it. This is God's word. This is God's revelation. This is and then he would impose that on everyone else.
Right.
And did he moderate a little bit here and there? Probably. And you know, I think certain folks in YWAM would try to claim credit for perhaps his slight moderation, you know, with
Near the
the
end, yeah.
songs for the shepherd and stuff like that. But no, Keith was the captain of his own ship. Absolutely, he was. And yeah. Melody, I see. So here's my take on Melody. This is going to sound harsh, but there is not much of anything before Keith died or after Keith died that I can say that I like or appreciate about Melody. And I think she was a victim in the beginning of being dragged along
Yeah.
with what Keith was doing, kind of chained to him. And if you read between the lines in the book she wrote, you'll see all kinds of just horrific relationship abuse. I mean, this was not healthy on any level.
Mhm.
She was kind of kicking and screaming,
You
dragging
mean
her heels
Keith abusing her?
emotionally and psychologically.
Emotionally,
I
okay.
Absolutely.
mean, I
Yeah, no.
think as women, we would have all hated to have signed up for a relationship like that.
Oh my
Yeah.
God, you
Yeah.
would not
Yeah.
So
want to be married to Keith Green.
Yeah, yeah.
Holy
It
shit,
was hard to
no.
yeah, right, I got it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hard to be married
and,
to someone like that.
we used to I say we, my former husband, and then the other couple that were in leadership, Wayne and Kathleen. I mean, we would joke privately whether we were looking at, you know, Josiah and Bethany, just these sweet, wonderful kids who were also very opinionated, very strong-willed, curly hair, looked so much like their dad. And we would joke, we'd say, Keith doesn't have dominant genes. He has oppressive genes. Everything about Keith is controlling and oppressive. And that's the truth. And so when I look at Melody and I think, okay, I do believe there was a victim status with
Mhm.
her in that. However, when she got the opportunity to take hold of the reins and do it her way, she did. And there was not, from my perspective, both, you know, originally rank and file within the ministry and then inner circle with the leadership team and then, you know, a personal inner circle. I mean, there was a callousness. There was not a concern or empathy for individual people. There was really bad abuse of the staff girls that wound up serving in her home for, and I don't mean physical abuse. I mean just, you know, used beyond,
Exploitation.
yeah,
Yeah.
exploited. Thank you.
Exploiting people. Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
absolutely exploiting and an ego and so there's a whole lot I don't like there. I can acknowledge her victimhood.
Yeah.
And I can also say she then perpetuated and created many, many victims.
Right, right.
So
Okay.
that's my
Yeah,
point.
I
Alright.
concur with all of that. I don't think I have anything more to say. I think the portion about Melody is really hard for some people to hear, but I think by the time, she was wrecked by the plane
Yeah,
crash,
she
which we
was.
can all understand,
Right.
but I think that ended up, hurt people. She ended up getting a platform that was taking that hurt out on a lot of people, and we could see that at the time. Many of us wish she would have stepped down and gone off and gotten some healing that she definitely needed, but I think being in control was a part of her coping mechanism.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
makes sense. So we're gonna take another short break here, and come back and talk more about the plane crash and talk about how this impacts us today and why we're talking about it so many years later. So we'll be back real soon with Tracey and Sharon. Okay. So I decided I'm going to break it up into 2 podcasts.
Sounds great.
So that's the second break of the second podcast. And they'll both be about 45 minutes, 50 minutes each. So it's one, we've gone an hour and 15 minutes. Can you go another half an hour?
Yeah, we got
We're
it.
good. We're good. Hey, we had the
Perfect.
burn schedule. We would work 24, 48 hours, sometimes longer. We could do it. Hey, brother, we got it covered.
And I'm not asking you to confess unconfessed sin.
No, it's so much easier that way.
This is easy.
I don't think there's any unconfessed sin left.
You've already confessed it all out.
I think we're open books. Everybody
is one
knows.
of your confessed sins. I was in the cult. Oh, jeez. Okay. We'll get back into it here. Let me just get my train of thought here. Where were we? We're at. Okay. So we'll come to that one later. Let's talk about the plane crash experience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, folks, we're back with Tracey and Sharon talking about the Last Days Ministries. And both of you were present the day of the private plane crash that killed Keith Green and 2 of his children and several other people. Is that right? You're both there?
Yes.
Yeah. So that must have been a terrible day.
Yes.
So I guess maybe you could explain from your perspective what happened, and then we can talk about some other things.
Tracey, you want to go first?
Do I want to go first? Yeah. So, and also, many of the staff members that were there present had different caregiving responsibility for the children at different times. So I know a lot of people, focus in on Keith, but yeah, we were very close to the pilot as well and to the
Oh,
children.
really?
And yes.
Okay. Okay.
And so yeah, total terrible day. So as we talked about before, we would go back to work after dinner. So it had been a fast day previously. We had just come back from dinner. One of the things out in the red building, and I share some pictures I know on my Instagram where you can see out the side door. It goes right out to the hangar and then the runway. And oftentimes in East Texas, there were these amazing thunderstorms and beautiful sunsets. And so we were in the habit of going out the side door. When somebody would say, "Hey, there's a beautiful sunset," so somebody came in and said, "Hey, does anyone know who went up in the plane? There's smoke at the end of the runway." And everybody working in the track department at that time, we ran out to the runway and we could see at the end that there was smoke coming up from the tree line. And immediately we had 2 pilots. I mean, we may have had 3 pilots, but 2 pilots that I was in relationship with at the time, and nobody knew which pilot had taken the plane up.
There were 3 pilots. How many?
Weren't there 3? I know that there were 2 that lived on the property.
But there was only 1 plane, right?
No, there were 2
No, we
planes.
had 2
there were 2
planes.
planes. Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
right.
so both pilots' wives I, knew and loved, and both had children. And so immediately we thought it was one of the other pilots, and we're starting to make phone calls out there as we're out on the runway looking at this. And then finally, one of the pilot's wife, who was not the pilot, had come into our circle, and she goes, "It's not Paul. It's not Paul. He didn't take it up. I thought he had gone into Dallas, but we're not quite sure where he was at that time." And so then that left, we knew that it was Don Burmeister that had gone up. And
Right.
so at this point, still, we don't know what happened. We don't know what's causing,
You don't know who's on the
smoke.
plane.
We don't know who's on the plane because they had, all of us were at work. We were working. We didn't know. Um, and then I'll let Sharon talk about the unfolding of that. So I'm up at the top of the runway. Everyone from the building has come out. We immediately, you could feel a looming sense of this is not good because there is smoke, but we have no context for this at that point. So we did what we did. We started forming a prayer circle and holding hands, and just at that point we could hear activity. People were starting to come and go, and I guess at that point is when somebody in the building called Melody.
Yeah.
Right.
And also we do go into a lot of detail in it on it in an episode on our
You have an
podcast.
episode, yeah, so
Yeah.
folks can see the whole episode on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So we
Be
don't
much
need to
more
go
detail. Yeah, you don't need to go
right.
into all that, but
So, but
how
the
many people were on the plane then?
well, there were 12
12.
people on a
Wow.
seven-seater plane,
Oh, wow.
and someone had made the call to Melody, and at that time, she was the only one who knew that Keith and Josiah and Bethany, and then there was a visiting family, the Smalley family, had gone up in the plane. So she was the only one who knew. And
There
she
there were several children and adults.
5 children and 2 adults from another family, plus Keith's 2 children.
Oh,
So there
wow.
were 7 children on this
Yes.
plane.
And
Wow.
at that
And
time, we knew, we didn't know the Smalley family. I don't even knew that they were visiting. Like, most of us had no context for the Smalley family.
yeah, we
Yep.
didn't know them. So I think that Melody came driving up because she and Keith had a house that was across the street from the main property. She came driving up to the building. I got in the car with her. There were a couple other people in the car. We went driving fast to the end of the runway. We could see the smoke. You could not drive further. There was a big fence and a field between the end of the runway and then where these trees were. So we drove back up to the buildings. Melody was going to go try to find somebody with a farmer. I got with one or two other of the gals and went and grabbed a couple of the horses because I thought we could get around and through the woods and to the crash site. And when we got there, it was still smoldering, all black and charred, and very eerie, very awful, utterly awful. And that night, I mean, it was very surreal. And that evening, coming back up, and then Martin, and I, and Wayne and Kathleen. So we were the other 2 couples on leadership with Wayne and with Keith and Melody. We got together and all 4 of us had the exact same thought is like, Keith did this. We were so
Really?
angry.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Immediately. It's like, Keith, you pushed it too hard, one time too many. How
Right.
come there, when we realized how many people were in that plane, because we'd flown in that, we've been in that plane, and we were like, Keith wanted to be a pilot, and all of us were like, we will never, never fly in a
Yeah.
plane with you, Keith. He was a
Right.
risk taker. He was a bully. He
Oh, yeah.
pushed people. And we have no doubt whatsoever that he manipulated and pushed Don into flying a plane with all these people overloaded. I mean, 12 people
Yeah,
on a
so 5
seven-seater plane.
5 adults and then 7 children, and then now
Yes.
they weren't all little children too, right? Weren't there some,
I
what,
think
10,
the
10,
youngest
11, 12, or
I
what?
think yeah, there were several that age.
Yeah.
But it's just so, it was people said what caused the plane crash? Well, gravity, aerodynamics, and arrogance. It was Keith's arrogance that put all those people in the plane.
Yeah,
And
that's the thing I just couldn't wrap my head
Mhm.
around for years. It's like, what pilot would allow that many people on the plane?
a
Yeah.
cult
A
follower
cult
who
following
is
pilot.
manipulated by an
Mhm.
arrogant, pushy, bully, no boundaries
Right.
guy who says, if you don't want to trust, then you're not following God. And I don't know what words Keith said to Don that day, but I had witnessed Keith over the years manipulate and control and bully people over and over and over again. And Don was a sweet and soft and servant's heart kind of guy. And I hate that some of the folks have who talk about the crash say, "Oh, he must have just been a people pleaser. He was a people pleaser," as if this is his weakness. Now,
Oh, right.
he was not that he did the wrong thing. I am not excusing what he
Yeah.
did. That was the
Yeah.
wrong thing to do. He
Right.
didn't even have his rating on it. He wasn't even insured on that plane.
Really?
But Keith
Yeah.
knew that. Keith
Mhm.
knew that. And Keith
Wow.
told him to get in and fly the plane.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's all wrapped up in the personality, the programming, because if
Mhm.
you say, all along, "Oh, we're hearing from God. God told me this,"
Mhm.
Mhm.
um, you know, if you don't, if you don't want to do something, you're not trusting God and all this stuff. And then this prophet, this one who is supposedly has the, the inside scoop with God, says, hey, it'll be okay. The Lord
That's
will
right.
protect us. Is
Yeah.
that
That's right.
kind of like what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think the other damaging thing in a cult mentality that we talk about is we had a contempt for college training skills, right? You have this contempt that the
Yes.
world has all of these kind
Right.
of, rules and regulations. And I can see this being a direct correlation of this contempt for physics, right? That he's not even certified to fly this plane, but somehow we think God provides where God calls, right?
Yeah.
That there's this false sense of protection that I
Hmm.
definitely believe they went into with that.
Right.
And it's crushing. My son has gone on to become a pilot himself, and so I've watched multiple case studies of pilot error, and the amount of things that were not checked off is catastrophic. Like it's hard for my brain to comprehend how many things they did not check off that
Yeah,
um
you're
is
right.
basic,
They were,
and
you
that
kind of,
makes me
yeah,
very sad.
right. But you can see it, like, people get out of the realm of rationality. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, we know from the facts that these things need to be worked in proper order before we can even take off. And it all becomes so supernatural, so miraculous. So, right, God is with us all the time. We're
Mhm.
invincible, right? And that's what people are, maybe that's, that whole environment, that whole culture was so ingrained in the pilot that he just, and he knew in his mind, well, my pilot training says this is not right, but I'm a whatever. I'm a Christian. I'm a child of
Mhm.
God. And Keith
Mhm.
is with us. Nothing can go wrong if
Yeah,
Keith is
I
there.
I
I don't know.
I don't know. I know that even in the hours afterwards, and obviously weeks and months, that same thread goes through, right? Unless a grain of wheat falls into the
Oh,
ground and dies,
right.
right, it bears much fruit. So the whole thing was spiritualized. The whole thing has
That's
been spiritualized from the time it
yes.
happened, and I think Sharon and I are some of the first people that put out there in the public sphere as far as like this is not a spiritualization of a
No,
tragedy that
no.
was very avoidable in many ways, and the fact that many people don't even know really what happened and how many people were in the plane, but it was the God's prophet. God decided to take God's prophet home for
You think how
various and
insidious
sundry
that
reasons.
is. I mean,
It's so
really.
hideous. It's so
It's
insulting to all the other people that lost their lives on that
yeah,
plane that
and then the
was
kids,
kept
right?
from
God
people,
decided to
right?
take the kids too. I mean, if
Exactly.
I
It's
remember
so insulting.
correctly, in Melody's book, it was John Dawson, I might be wrong, who gave that verse to Melody. I don't know if that's true or not, but I
That's
remember
what so we with the
someone
brother
gave
from
her
Last
that
Days,
verse.
we have that because I
We
think she
oh,
does
you
say
just
that
went through a
in the
tragedy.
book.
You need a Bible verse. Here's the Bible verse that will help you heal. Unless a grain of wheat fall on the ground, it won't bear fruit. What
Well,
is
and at
that?
that time, we
And when
didn't
we're and
understand how
with
insidious YWAM is, but
yeah,
now knowing
Mhm.
they were very concerned and preempting any deterioration of Last Days Ministries. It's like, we've got to save this machine at all costs. And so now
Because
I totally
Keith
see this.
Right, because right before this, Keith was,
Mm.
Keith and Melody and Wayne not Wayne, Keith and Melody and Martin and I had gone to Europe, and we had visited all these YWAM
oh, yeah,
bases,
you
and
went to
Keith
Europe with them. Okay.
yeah, and
I
so
remember
Keith
that.
is, pounding the whole missions thing, and I
Right,
write this
right.
article, should a Christian go to college, which really is no, you should go to missions,
Yeah.
and, all this bullshit, and so Lauren and Keith are drooling, or they're having wet dreams over the idea of 100,000 people going into missions, and Keith is going to be the mouthpiece to go make this happen. And why wham? They never in their wildest dreams thought they would have someone who could draw a crowd like Keith
Like
Green
Keith
and
Green's
raise money like Keith Green. And then he goes and kills himself and his kids and these other people in this plane. So now what? and they have this video from this one concert that had just happened, and hence roll out the memorial concerts with this whole emphasis and idea of raise kids to go to Youth with a Mission. And I think in the end, I
So
think
the memorial concert was specifically saying youth with a mission.
absolutely
Not
saying Youth with a Mission.
not just any missions.
It
or
was
anything.
missions,
No.
but who's the tables in the back? Get some training.
Oh,
Keith
right.
even says, get some training. Who's offering missions training?
Yeah.
Youth with a Mission,
Who's
DTS
up there
schools.
speaking as
Yes.
well?
Lauren
Right.
Cunningham.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was Youth with a Mission. And, you know, I think we heard that most likely a minimum of 250,000 people, kids, teenagers and young 20 somethings got recruited into Youth with a Mission because of that, because of what Keith was saying and what Tracey and I and others gave our lives, sacrificed our lives to spread that message and make it all happen. And it's horrific to think about that now, because
Yes.
it perpetuated so much damage and so much destruction, not only in those minimum of 250,000 people, but think of everyone else attached to them, whether it was their parents or their siblings or their spouses or their children. It's just the ripple effect is huge and very, very bad.
Yeah. Now I want to say, I was influenced to go into the mission field partly by Keith, and it was before all this you're talking about. He wrote another track called "Music or Missions."
Missions.
Mhm.
Yep.
You remember that one?
That's one of the first ones.
That
Still
was
in
one of the first
California, we
ones.
were there.
Was that
Yeah.
number
Was that one?
2?
Yeah.
It's number
Right.
2.
So
Let's
that
jump to number
one,
2.
that really impacted me. I wasn't considering going into music, but it was just like, oh my gosh, you
Mhm.
know, evangelizing the neighbors down the street is not enough. We have to
Mhm.
go. And then I got into the unreached people movement, where
Yeah.
World U.S. Center for World Mission in Pasadena, California. I went there and
Mhm.
got training, and then you know there was Fuller Seminary right there. They had a School of World Mission, so there was a huge mission movement going on. YWAM was just a part of it, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
A small part, but they actually became a very large part of it. And I noticed something when I did go on the mission field. I chose the first organization I went with was Food for the Hungry, which was a Christian development,
Mhm.
relief and development organization. And you know, we were really a decent organization, but we still had the evangelical theology that we're all talking about here. And, you know, it wasn't Keith Greenish, but it was kind of, in a sense, it was, because some of the people that went had the zeal and loved Keith Green. And it's like, yeah, we're going on the mission
Thank
field,
you.
and we're going to Somalia, and we're going to work with Muslims, and we're going to try to convert them. And we're going to be part of this wave of revival in the end times and all this stuff. Right.
Mhm.
And so, but I noticed one of the other red flags I had with some of these ministries was YWAM. They had a presence in one of the countries that I went to, named Malawi. And one time, a group of YWAMers came to Malawi, and they were so arrogant.
Hmm.
They thought they knew everything. Of course, they'd gone through missions training school with YWAM, right?
A
They were
10-week DTS for
Yeah.
12 weeks.
exactly. Right. So
3
they
months.
show up, they don't even talk very much with the YWAM representative that was actually living there. She was just I don't know what she was doing, but she at least knew the protocol to take when you in the country, and the cultural cues that you needed to do. And these people just made their own arrangements, and they went off, and because they were praying and they heard God's will, whatever
Mm.
God was leading them, and they were not they weren't well received at all by the local
Mm.
people, because they did not know what they were doing.
They're the most unprepared missionaries, and
Yeah.
I we've just had too many countless stories, but there's many different types of YWAM bases, but I would say the majority of YWAM bases, they don't do good things for the community. Like, at least you are feeding people. They literally go unprepared, pray, and most of the stuff that they achieved is really breaking down the missionary's heart, right? To go back into the
No, it's
United
true, because
States and become politically activists.
the
So
missionaries that were there for like years, these YWAMers would show up for short term, what, a month or two, or
Mhm.
just a few weeks, and going, these people are acting like they know what they're doing. It's like,
Yeah, no,
this is
they're very
crazy.
unprepared. They do
Yeah.
skits, they pass out tracts, they do praying, but they don't really
Oh,
do any lasting good works in
No.
the community.
the
Well,
For the most
arrogance.
part, yeah.
and
The
then it's part of the sense of the urgency. You've got to get the gospel out, and you don't take the time to learn the language and the culture. Just go ahead and do it.
pretty
But
ridiculous.
yeah, really. So I'm just saying that there was another side to missions that maybe was more thought out, but it was still, believe me, we still had the evangelical theology that we've been talking about
Mhm.
here, the doctrine of hell, the way they use the Bible and all that stuff. We had our own problems, but it was a little different than YWAM.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
anyways, what about I mean, why are we talking about this now? I mean, haven't we
Right.
outgrown this, or is this still going on? What's going on today, and how is it the same as what you experienced?
Oh, well, there are still these, if you want to call them parachurch ministries or high control
Mhm.
organizations, everything from IHOP KC and the Mike Bickle scandal that's coming
Right.
down. It the thing is, this problem is going to wear all kinds of different coats of many colors.
Yes.
And you're going to see it in you're going to see it in radicalized religious belief systems all the world over. It's it's easy for Americans to look at issues of radical Islam and go, "Oh my gosh, isn't that awful and isn't that crazy?" Because we have grown up with this Jesus story, and so we think that it's Christian, it's wholesome, it's good, it's all these things, and if it's just this kind of cultural, kinda off to the side, nice ideas and nice precepts to live by, that's one thing, but when it becomes something that you wholeheartedly believe is absolute, it's that it's that absolute belief that leads to destruction and devastation in the individual's life of self-loathing, of not being able to trust yourself, of getting into all kinds of unhealthy and toxic personal relationships, whether
Mhm.
it's in a marriage or whether it's even with your parents or raising your kids. I mean, it really does negatively impact the human experience in a profound way. But then it's not content enough to just damage the individual who believes it, just their brain's infected, so it's going to hurt them and their life. No, it now wants to impose itself across all of society and make life miserable for others. If you're gay, if you're trans,
That
if you speak another language, if your skin is the wrong color, if you have a different belief in certain politics, it is not content with just infiltrating and corrupting and controlling the individual. It is now all these tendrils that are going out through Christian nationalism that are trying to basically take hold of and eliminate the freedoms and democracies that they're claiming they're trying to protect. It's
Mhm.
just so screwed up.
No, and it's because we've got this worldview that, like
Mm.
Christian nationalism, for example. Oh, we're a Christian country. God, you know, founded this country for a purpose so that we could send missionaries all over the world. And it's like, well, actually, freedom of religion just becomes freedom of the Christian religion and not
Right.
anyone else. All
Mhm.
these other
Absolutely.
religions, right? They don't really, because it would be God's will for all of us or most of us to become Christians, and there would be a revival like Charles Finney had, and all this stuff, and
You know
and
what?
so
I
it becomes imposing it on others rather than because that would be what God wants in the end.
and I got to just say this. If all that's true, then the God of the Bible is a wimp ass, pathetic, ineffective deity because he wouldn't even make it in a Marvel movie. to have so few people really understand and follow him, I mean, it's a pretty much giant failed experiment, don't you think?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, if you do the math, depending on who does the math, 3/4 of the
Yeah.
human race is gonna be internal damnation.
At
I mean,
least.
Yeah.
and it's probably more if you the more, the more Keith
If you
Greenish or
I was gonna say, yeah, if you were Last Days,
conservative you
way more.
get, it becomes 7/8 and even
Mhm.
less than that, right? So, I mean, so that doesn't sound like success to me.
No, it doesn't.
So
Yeah.
what kind of a worldview is this? That you're right. It has become so bad that it's gotten to the. I mean, there's always been Christian nationalism kind of like lurking around the corners, but now it's just more
It
prevalent.
it is, and I think for us, we know that we were young, and a lot of it now with our older brains, we can put it
Mm.
together. And it was Last Days Ministries, Melody Green, that started Americans Against Abortion, that
That's
started a
right.
petition that she handed it off to Pat Robertson
That's
as
right.
being elected for president. It was where she linked arms with Jerry Falwell and the religious right. And at that time, I will say I was already having problems with that. Like, I didn't join a political organization. I didn't want to be a part of a political organization. But looking at our past when we were young and impressionable, and we had a part in the foundation stones of that. And I think that's a lot of the catalyst. Sharon and I've wanted to come on and say, hey,
Mhm.
we were young and easily indoctrinated, and we laid some foundation stones here that we're telling you are really wrong. We were in error. This is
Mhm.
insidious. You've got organizations, again, I know we talk a lot about youth with a mission, but they so co-opted the Last Days Ministries message with the seven mountain mandate, where
Yes.
they're going to
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
over, right, the political
That's part of
landscape.
the nationalism,
Yes,
right?
and so we're here like, let's tell you what really is underneath all that, what
Eh,
we lived, and
Yes.
of
what
course,
really
what
happened,
really happened,
how it
what
came
really
about.
happened in our lives, how it was so exploitive, what they've really been doing behind these closed doors. Do not fall for it. And I would say, on the personal level, for me, just having Melody Green's book, No Compromise, out there as the main record of Keith Green's life and Last Days
It's not.
Ministries,
Right.
I was like, this is not even close to being true. um, we
Yeah.
didn't use the term hagiography, but it's perfect for this as far as what she told and how she told it. And I was like, Sharon, like you've known Keith since you were 14. It's like, we've got to go on and start setting this record straight, because there are still young people being influenced by that book. There are still young people being recruited to these organizations, to International House of Prayer, Kansas City. A lot of them will say they read the book No Compromise and were really inspired. And so we've wanted to go on record and just say, let's tell you the underbelly of all of this,
Yeah, that's
and
very
point
important.
to the red flags so that you can also, I love when you use
Right.
that, red flags. When you start seeing these red flags, step back, start reading, do something else. Don't fall for it, because there's a lot of red flags in these organizations.
So, I wanna comment on something else, and that is how I believe that the whole pro-life emphasis, how it grabbed hold of the Christian movement in the especially in the early '80s and mid-'80s, and what I how I think that is a corrupted view, and a corrupted direction for those who want to kind of be Christians and be good Christians and do something, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
think about this. I mean, it takes next to nothing to hand out anti-abortion tracts. It
Mhm.
takes next to nothing of a personal commitment to picket at an abortion center.
Mhm.
And yes, you can take these women and try to get them to keep their babies or give them up for adoption. But you know what usually happens? What usually happens is there's an abandonment of women and their
Mm.
children. This is not about let's help this person raise a child through to go to college. Let's help this entire life cycle. No, because you know what? That takes personal investment. That takes sacrifice. That takes something of myself, of a human being connected with another human being and having empathy and compassion and that's tough to do.
Yeah, I
Jesus
think
said, "Feed the hungry, clothe the naked." He was like, invest in the human in front of you who needs help in the here and now. But instead of looking at those who are disadvantaged in the inner city, who have all these issues that are messy and not nice and neat and easy, and not all contained in a womb where they can't talk back to you, those we push aside and ignore. The evangelical Christian, white Christian church today does not go there. But the whole thing is about, we've got to stop abortion. And it's a false flag. It's a way to feel like you're being compassionate and you're trying to be the champion for the disadvantaged, but you're really not. And I can say that as someone I wrote the pro-life, anti-abortion articles that were in Last Days magazine.
you wrote the what do we do with children with that one?
I didn't write that one. That was Melody, but I wrote
Okay.
attitudes and actions
Oh, I
and
remember that one. Yeah.
avenues for abortion. I wrote multiples,
Oh, I see.
right?
Okay.
And now I've asked them to please, I asked them a while back to
Oh,
discontinue. Hopefully they're not there. But I was absolutely involved in
right.
that. And the pro-life march, and I mean the Walk America for Life and all this other stuff. I mean, I know every aspect of it. And I'm telling you, people, if you're out there as a Christian and you feel that this is the thing that Jesus is calling you to, you know what? Maybe helping uh unwed mothers or people who are disadvantaged and wanting to help them with their babies. Yeah, that's great. But why don't you start with what Jesus talked about in the Bible? Why don't you start with the hungry and the naked and the homeless and the immigrant? That's who he said we should be helping.
No, you're right. It's just an inconsistent way of looking at you know uh, Jesus' teachings, and all of a
Right.
sudden it's all focused on abortion. I mean, the number one
Mhm.
reason women have abortions is it's either they're in a bad relationship or they're economically poor. They can't afford
Mhm.
it. So
Mhm.
why aren't we, why aren't Christians at the front lines of poverty alleviation
Mhm.
in various
Mhm.
contexts? That's social justice. That's not good enough. That, all this
Mhm.
stuff, right? Right. And
Yeah.
now all this stuff impacted myself too. I mean, I remember when Melody was in an Operation Rescue thing,
Mhm.
and I did that too. I was
Mhm.
actually in jail for 3
Did
days
you? I was gonna say
in
you got
LA.
arrested.
Yeah, arrested. And we were just all in, and we were like, we were doing the greatest thing. And this is like the civil rights movement, the new civil rights movement and everything.
Mm.
And then you realize that, wait a minute, a lot of these people that are pushing this stuff are religious bigots. I mean,
Mhm.
there's something else going on here that you're
Something
not
else.
seeing.
Yeah.
And so you have to have discernment. But I don't mean just praying to God, but I mean really think it
Right.
through and
Right.
get your
Mhm.
facts straight, and to make up, your minds and what to do about something like that. So this has been fascinating. We've run out of time here at the second part of our conversation here with Sharon and Tracey. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on the podcast and sharing all these
Thank
things. We
you.
really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm gonna have to post a picture of me in my beer wench outfit so that when we
Well, if you could
advertise when this
give me
drops.
that beer winch outfit, then we could throw that in there in the graphic
Ah,
somewhere,
that's
right?
great. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
Right.
Thank you,
So
Michael.
the way I see you guys, you're exposing harmful faith, and we didn't get to it. Maybe another time we could, but there's a way to recover what I call healthy
Mm,
faith or a renewed worldview. We'd love to hear you sometime talk about what you're rebuilding and
Mhm.
your faith or your philosophy of life. But until next time, we'll look forward to that. So, folks, thanks for joining us here on the Spiritual Brew Pub. Until next time, enjoy responsibly.